Okay, so this is the second video lecture we're talking about preschool between the ages of 3 and 6. And in the previous lecture, it was a couple days ago, I confess, we were talking about health, physical development. And in this one, I'm going to pick up and make some sort of broad comments about health and safety in small children. And then in the next one, I want to start talking about cognitive development. So basically, this slide, and we kind of follow some of these topics throughout all of the developmental stage. But by this age, children have 12% of children have begun showing signs of obesity. We've got a lot of potential food allergies. Your textbook has a list of, I think there's 7 of them, 7 common ones: shellfish, tree nuts, eggs, dairy products, and most, if not as many of these allergies, children will outgrow. There's a theory that says something about allergies have something to do with too clean of an environment, that children don't learn, or that our immune system hasn't developed an ability to, I guess it's hypersensitive, really. It's hypersensitive to whatever the allergens happen to be. Of course, we need to be paying attention to oral health, that most permanent teeth are in place by the time a child is 6 years of age. The most common causes of accident and death at this stage are actually accidents in the home. My mother still tells stories about drinking floor wax when I was a child, and touching the lawnmower after it was hot. Toddlers, kids this age, are moving really fast, and they can get into risky situations without a parent noticing, because these things happen so fast. Highly active, and they are risk takers. They're learning about their world. We also, the observation that the health and well-being of children have some strong environmental influences. As a sociologist, the ones that appear to me, show up the most to me, are the social economic status ones. That, for instance, homelessness is influenced by income and social class. There's lots more risks for a family who doesn't have steady housing. It also influences like where a person can afford a house or can afford housing, and we know that housing in places that are more or less environmentally desirable are less expensive. And then it's interesting to me that in this textbook they make reference to what is called the chilling effect of immigration status, and certainly in today's political economy, you can see how someone who might fear the integrity of their immigration status, this might make them more likely to seek help or to seek medical attention if they are afraid that they might be deported. So that means kids maybe are less not going to school as often. A parent may be concerned or maybe not seek medical attention. So anyway, we'll see some of these themes running through some of the other chapters. Okay, so now the next couple lectures are really going to be about cognitive development, and a point that I hope I've made in previous chapters is that children think differently. And the way that you are thinking right now, at whatever stage in your life, was not always the way that you thought. In other words, because your brain has developed the ability to think differently. And so these first few years, there's a lot of cognitive changes happening, in the way that a child thinks. And I hope I've mentioned in a previous chapter, or I hope I do eventually, or at some point down the road, is that our brain is not thought to be fully developed until we're about 25. So even unless you are, your cognitive development is going to change over your whole life, of course. But relative to children at this age, some of the important concepts is this idea of pre-operational thinking. And this is Piaget's idea that says that kids go through these steps, these sequence, and between 2 and 7, in this pre-operational thinking, children have started to what's called symbolic function of, they're able to understand the symbolic function of words and symbols and images, and this is an advanced towards more abstract thought. Right, so if you think about pretend play as a kind of abstract thought, a stick becomes a phone, or they're able to see something or give something a meaning that it doesn't have. One of the examples that's mentioned is this phenomena of animism, and that is when we animate something, like if you give a life to a stuffed animal or something, you are giving symbolic meaning, you are using it to represent something. And And that's what we mean by symbolic function, to think about something that it is not, right? I keep thinking about postmodern theory in another class, but it's basically about symbols. Some other kind of concepts under this pre-operational thinking is centration. And centration is just a fancy way of talking about how children are able to see. They focus on one particular element. So an example of centration is this concept of conservation, and that is that quantity is unrelated to arrangement. So I believe there's a video in this chapter, but the classic one is a child is given fluid in a tall, skinny canister or a short, wide canister, and a child will think, and it's the same amount of fluid, it's just distributed differently. Bars and restaurants sometimes will serve people and take advantage of this idea, the principle of conservation. But if a child sees the fluid in a tall, skinny thing, they will suggest or believe that there's more fluid in a tall, skinny thing than a short, fat one, because they're only thinking about the tall. They're not thinking about the wide, right? And so they're focusing on another example, I think that may be in your chapter, in your module 2, is the idea of pennies. So the experiment goes that a researcher lines up two rows of pennies, 5 in each row. And when they're the same, when the line is the same length, the child says, yeah, they're the same number of pennies. But when they stretch out one line of pennies, the child will think that there are more in the more stretched out line. A similar kind of thing, I think, under this quality is the cracker experiment. That if you give or a cake, if you give a child one cracker that's yay big, they will think that they have, and you have 2 crackers, right? You take the same one, break it in 2. So you have 2 smaller pieces, but they will think you have more because you have 2 and they only have 1, because they're focusing on the number of crackers, not the size of the cracker. So that's an example of centration, because they're only looking at one aspect and neglecting the others. In this case, they're neglecting the size. They're looking at the aspect of the quantity. You have 2 and I only have 1. Okay, they have not yet learned the phenomena of transformation. And transformation, it would be like water versus ice, right? They're not able to cognitively take that abstract leap from an ice cube is now a pile of water. Another element, and I think my spacing is incorrect here, another example or concept that falls under this pre-operational thinking is egocentrism. And that's what this image over here suggests. And egocentrism is a child's inability to, or they see things and they assume you see things from the same perspective that they have. So in this classic experiment, right, the child will start over here on the side with 2 mountains, and they'll see they have 2 mountains, and then they'll trade places with the researcher, and now they only see 1 mountain, and then the researcher will ask them, like, what do you think I see? And ego, meaning self-centered, the child will assume that the researcher only sees the same things that they do. Because again, they haven't developed the complicated or the very abstract understanding that your view is different than my view. Now, this is developing during this period, right? And this is a very important concept that is evolving, and hopefully by the time they get to 6 years old, they have developed this. And this ability to understand that you see things differently than I do is what we call theory of mind. So the theory of mind is the idea that a child has developed the theory, that they have the understanding that your mind is different than my mind. And this is very important. This is a very important idea and it's a cognitive leap, right? Because it's abstract. We would call it, is this pre-concrete, right? And so they've taken their understanding. And the reason theory of mind, among other things, is really important is because this is the foundation of things like empathy, right? That in order to feel, in order to understand empathy, I first have to understand that your experiences are different than mine. And I'm going to stop right here. And in the next slide, and in the next lecture, I'm going to start off with the theory of mind.